Charles Lindbergh was the first man to fly across the Atlantic solo. The flight happened May 21st, 1927. The plane took off from Manila, New York to Paris, France in 1927. Charles Lindbergh was an American aviator and a military officer, and he started out as a U.S. Air Mail pilot. His flight across the Atlantic was 33 and a half hours. His flight was about 5,800 kilometers in a single-engine, purpose-built Ryland Marlin called the Spirit of St. Louis. The first solo flight across the Atlantic was also the year the Model T car came out. Charles Lindbergh was born February 4th, 1902, and died August 26, 1974. He was nicknamed Lucky Lindy, the Lone Eagle, and Slim. He had 11 children, and sadly one of them was involved in a famous kidnapping and was found 2 months later killed. Charles Lindbergh was born in Detroit, Michigan, and spent most of his childhood in Minnesota. Lindbergh always exhibited an interest in mechanics and motorized transportation. He started college as a mechanical engineer and became fascinated with flying. However, he never finished college, but then enrolled in the Nebraska Aircraft Corporation's flying school in Lincoln, and flew his first plane in a biplane. Many things led to the first flight across the Atlantic: the new discovery of hydrogen gas, the creation of a jet engine powerful enough to get a plane across the Atlantic, and the new discoveries of aerodynamics and glide. The invention of the first plane in 1903 by the Wright brothers led to advancements in planes that eventually led to a plane safe enough to fly across the Atlantic. After the first solo flight, planes began to become more popular. There was a new interest in aerospace and aeronautical engineering. Planes were advancing so fast that not too long after the first flight across the Atlantic, there was a plane safe enough for two British men, John Alcock and Arthur Brown, to be the first duo to fly across the Atlantic. John Alcock and Arthur Brown were inspired by an ad in 1913 by the British newspaper, the Daily Mail, which offered the price of £10,000, which was $1.1 million today, for the first duo to fly across the Atlantic together. However, John Alcock and Arthur Brown did not accomplish this until way later. The flight that John Alcock and Arthur Brown used 865 gallons of fuel. The plane they used was adapted by removing bomb racks, and then they added an extra fuel tank for the extra space they removed the bomb racks with. The first solo flight across the Atlantic led to goods and ideas to be spread from one hemisphere to the other in a quick and efficient manner. Transport by aircraft is a broad category and can carry multiple passengers or different cargoes. It was a useful skill in the 1900s, and it still is a very important skill today. The skill of going from one hemisphere to the other and flying across oceans led to a useful tactic in military and transatlantic warfare. The first Atlantic flight also led to general and commercial aviation that would follow in the years to come. Without Charles Lindbergh flying across the Atlantic, there wouldn't have been as many advancements in planes in the years to come. By the first solo flight across the Atlantic, it proved that planes were a very safe and efficient manner to get across the Atlantic.